program in law, ethics, and society. And today we have Anthony Wright, our own Anthony Wright from Sonoma State University, and he's going to be speaking to us. Next week, we have out of town guest lecturer, and then our last live talk will be Megan, who will be talking to us on 2 weeks from now. All right, so without any further ado, let's give a hand to Anthony Wright.
Hello, 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 hello. So I will see actually if the microphone for the PA works. And does it work? I don't know yet. It has the yellow light. Check, check, check. Well, I'll put it on anyway. So I'm my doctorate's in Chinese philosophy and complexity science. And I'm grateful to have been teaching the general education courses of critical thinking and public speaking. But one of my mentors, I would say, is the philosopher entertainer Alan Watts. Anybody ever hear of Alan Watts? Yeah, he's a pretty great guy. If it wasn't for Alan Watts, I wouldn't be standing on this stage. So one of the primary questions that Alan Watts asks is, who are you? Who are you? Are you just this? Who are you? Are you this? Are you the people in the room? Are you the people in this building? Are you people on campus? Who are you? And what is this event? It happens to be, I'm a piano technician. Well, I'll get to that. But anybody know Aaron Sorkin and The West Wing? This is one of my favorite videos from The West Wing.
This guy walking down the street when he falls in the hole. The walls are so that you can't get out. A doctor passes by, the guy shouts up, "Hey, you can help me out?" The doctor writes a prescription, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a priest comes along, and the guy shouts up, "Father, I'm down in this hole, can you help me out?" The priest writes out a prayer, throws it down in the hole, and moves on. Then a friend walks by. "Joe, it's me, can you help me out?" The friend jumps in the hole. Our guy says, "Are you stupid? Now we're both down." The friend says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before. I know the way out."
Yeah, I've been down here before, and I know the way out. And I am a piano technician. I'm a tradesman for 53 years, and I've worked with Yamaha and with Steinway and tuned for Herbie Hancock, and goodness, I didn't get to tune for Ray Charles, but would have loved to do that. But a piano is a highly tensioned system of some 225 strings that is holding about 50 tons of tension, or 25 tons of tension, excuse me, in the larger pianos. So in a way, if a carpenter sees the world as a nail, I see the cosmos as vibration. And if you talk to Brian Greene, who is the string theorist, everything is vibration. So one of the things that I look at for a way out, and when I'm tuning a piano, I need to set a temperament, which is the reference octave for the whole rest of the piano. And I will have to set the intervals. So we're going to talk about a number of things in terms of setting structures and the reference octave. In my opinion, the whole cosmos is patterns of vibration. And that's one of the things that was really striking to me in my study of fractal geometry and of also, which is a cousin of complexity science and also Chinese philosophy. And I thought, well, this is so interesting. There are certain points where they seem to parallel. So what I want to talk about next is, so I set this temperament of the piano. And what I want to talk about next is how sound, and I'm going to not let this go very long. This is from a film called Cymatics, where sound waves are shot into Lycopodium moss spores, and they use the moss spores because they're very viscous. So this was done by a Swiss physicist named Hans Jenny. And look what happens when they shoot sound waves into this Lycopodium moss.
Certain frequencies or with certain tones, an extraordinarily interesting phenomenon is seen. Watch. We see two regularly and continuously rotating areas at either end of a diameter, going round and round like weathercocks.
So I feel like the whole cosmos is vibration. And this is Deepak Chopra, who is a well-known alternative medicines physician. And I really liked what he had to say in a recent conference. And I'll turn this down because it's a pretty high volume.
The principles of Eastern wisdom, there is no such thing as the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness that we speak of in the scientific world is based on a philosophy of science that is called naive realism. It's a philosophy of science, and all our current science is based on that philosophy. That philosophy has certain assumptions. Every science, every philosophy, every system of thought begins with an assumption. So in naive realism, the fundamental assumptions are, number one, that matter is the ontological primitive of the universe. Atoms, molecules, force fields are how we begin experience of the universe. First of all, no one has actually seen a substance called matter. All we experience is our own perceptual activities in consciousness. So what we call matter is a human construct or a human perceptual activity, which is within a very narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum. So the visual spectrum is something like whatever, 80 to 300 something, 400 nanometers. Anything outside of that is not part of our experience. But whatever we experience as human perceptual activity is what we call matter. There's a problem with that assumption, as I just told you. Matter is not a substance, it's a perceptual activity in consciousness. And in our case, a human perceptual activity.
So I'm going to skip forward because we're short on time. Chopra's conjecture is that instead of matter being the ontological primitive, which is the basis of everything, his idea, and in Eastern philosophy, the basic ontological primitive is consciousness. And I've been thinking about this for quite a while. And so I had an idea about these are all nested points of reference. And let me get my laser pointer out. So I say that attention, which is our conscious buffer, is a facet of consciousness because we also have unconsciousness. And I like to say to my class when people get hung up on wondering if they are going to know enough or take in enough, and this is from another seminar, because your unconscious mind knows more than your conscious mind. And the reason it does that is because it runs the body, it runs the heart. Because the unconscious mind knows more than the conscious mind, you already know more than you think you do. So I say that attention is a facet of consciousness, is a facet of awareness, is a facet of mind, is a facet of natural organic pattern. And I'm going to take these one at a time. Attention is an information buffer, and there are, as you are well aware, as social media participants, attention engineers, attention merchants. They're selling your attention. In 1962, psychologist George Miller came out with a magic number 7 ± 2, which is what he thought the buffer size was for the attention. There's another man named Tor Noratranders, wrote a book, I believe it was in the late 80s, from the user illusion, say that there's 40 bits of attention versus 50 trillion cells that are also presumed to have consciousness. So attention is a function of consciousness, and consciousness is music of awareness. And when I say music, I'm looking at both harmony and resonance. And harmony is, this is he, and it's the Chinese character that has a stalk of wheat and a mouth. And so you feel at harmony when you've been fed. It's about relationships with others, facets, and with other facets of consciousness, and resonance. And these are two characters, Gan Ying. And they're some of my favorite characters in Chinese philosophy. Gan is a mouth and a sword and a heart. And Ying is a guy with birds and a heart with a cliff. So the way that you would speak about Gan Ying is to speak so sincerely that it almost wounds the heart, so that we can fly together from a cliff like a flock of birds. This is known as a murmuration of starlings. This is what our thoughts do. I'm not going to let this go on very long because we're short on time. So then we have awareness. That's broader than consciousness. And awareness as a function of the Tao. My mentor, Dr. Wu, said we can't know the Tao, but we can know the function of the Tao. And the function of the Tao is to make space for things. We couldn't have this meeting in this room unless there was space here. So that's one of the things that the Tao does. You can't speak about it, but you know the function of it. And then we have mind. And this is Shunryu Suzuki. And he wrote a very infamous book named Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I thought mind meant this. And again, my mentor, Dr. Wu, said the problem with people in the West is you're thinking with your brain and not your mind. So there is an idea in Chinese philosophy that mind is heart mind, because the brain, this is the character for brain. So it's now. So you have pork and a head with hair and a pictograph of a skull with brains inside with on a person. So, but the brain is cold, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. But the heart is warm. And interestingly, that looks very cardiac. This is the character Xing. So I prefer to have my classes, rather than being the ontological primitive of matter or logic, I want to have my classes be filled with heart mind. And then this, again, is another character called Li, and it's about patterns in jade, wood, muscle, and patterns in nature, as shown by complexity science. And when I first came across this, and Alan Watts was right on the edge of this, he said that patterns in jade are quite irregular, but they never make a mistake. And I thought to myself, okay, what's one of the things that's being studied in complexity science? And one of them was the study of turbulence by Lorenz. But what is this but frozen turbulence? So I wondered, is Li fractal? And it turns out that it is. And this is one of the things about fractal geometry. This is an example of a fern, which is self-similarity and it's a series of isosceles triangles. So you've got the whole fern leaf as a big isosceles, and then you've got the offshoots as other isosceles, and then the little leaflets are also isosceles. But again, that is a hierarchy of shapes. And so this is the fractal geometry of Confucius' great learning. And first of all, in Chinese culture, starting probably 2500 BCE or even further back, there were, if you were a learned person, you would know the 5 classics. So I believe it's the classic of changes, poetry, history, spring and autumn annals, and one more, which I'm forgetting right now. But, oh, the classic of rights. Thank you. And the classic of rights was, this is Chuxi, and Chuxi was what is called, started what is called, or actually implemented what is called Neo-Confucianism in China. And it was the ruling philosophy from 1138 to 1200 AD till 1900 when Mao took over, or slightly before that, the last empire. And Chuxi pulled out of the classic of rights. And the idea of Confucian rights, people say, oh, they're so rigid. But the idea of having a right is to say, okay, what's going on in the world? How can we align ourselves with the momentum of the world so that we get that boost from whatever is happening? So right now, this is the time of fall. So this is a time of harvest. So there are harvest rituals. But there are the 4 books that were used to govern. And one of the main ones was the Da Shui, or called the Great Learning. And things have their root and their branches. It can't be helped that when the root is neglected, that what should spring from it will be well ordered. And I missed one. No? Okay. And it's, you may have heard of this. If you want to have a peaceful planet, well, then your country's got to be peaceful. And if the country's going to be peaceful, then your community has to be peaceful. And if the community is going to be peaceful, then your family has to be peaceful. And if your family has to be peaceful, then you have to be peaceful. And there is that nested structure. So to regulate the family and cultivate the self, straighten the heart, this is how you become sincere, to extend knowledge to the utmost. And this is a Western translation, is in the investigation of things. But I retranslated the characters, Wu, as organic pattern. So to pattern yourself after the organic world, because then you would be at peace. Completion of wisdom it lies in finding the fractal natural patterns of things. So you cultivate the self and become sincere and straighten the heart and regulate the family and order the community. And some other Neo-Confucians said there is a meditative technique called Jingzuo, which is called quiet sitting. So you study the work of the masters for half the day, and then you go out and sit in the forest. And the idea was to study the patterns inside and study the pattern outside. And they said, after a while, there will come a breakthrough that you'll notice that the patterns are the same. Now I'm going to switch to brain hemisphericity. This is a famous Einstein quote: the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. And I study people like Brene Brown and Jill Bolte Taylor and Maya Angelou. And Brene Brown and Jill Bolte Taylor said we are feeling creatures that think. The center of our brains is limbic, and we have this outside layer of thinking. And think about how different things would be if Descartes would have said, I feel, therefore I think, rather than I think, therefore I am. Think how different that would be. Or, okay, I trust my unconscious mind, so it just taps me on the shoulder. There's a story about an evangelical acquaintance of mine who said, Anthony, you're so spiritual. How can you be so spiritual and not be Christian? And I went, well, I studied Buddhism and Taoism. And he said, well, tell me about Buddhism. So I told him the story of the Buddha, but I also came across there was a sutra or a text called the Diamond Sutra. And in the Diamond Sutra, Buddha's disciple said, whose name was Subhuti, said, oh, master, your merit is greater than all the numerous sands of the Ganges. And Buddha said, just so, Subhuti, but that's only a way of talking about it. And so I came back to my acquaintance, and I have a mind worm for you. And it is, if you can think of it, it's already too small. So think of that. And he struggled, my friend or my acquaintance, because the more he thought about it, the more it was centripetal, popped him out. And think of that. When you think of something, you put it into a concept box. And that's part of the hole that people fall into, is this concept box. I've been down here before, and I know the way out. So let's look at that. And this is Ian McGilchrist, another brain scientist. One of the things Ian McGilchrist says is that I realize that I'm risking being a little too simplistic here, but I don't have a lot of time to get into this. The right side of the brain is parallel processing, and the left side of the brain is a serial processor. The left side of the brain is self-fulfilling, what did I say here? The left side of the brain is self-validating. Thank you. So it says, this is all I see, therefore this is all there is. Well, if you can think of it, it's already too small. So this is Katagiri, Dane and Katagiri, who was a Zen priest in Minnesota. And I would go every Wednesday night back in the 80s to sit and listen to him lecture on the Blue Cliff Record and some of the other koans. And a koan is a public case. But before the session began, we would sit zazen, meditation, for 40 minutes. So I noticed his affect. And then he started his lecture. And his affect didn't change. Well, I was curious. And then he got done with his lecture, and his affect didn't change. And then I had an insight, and I realized he was still meditating. So part of this is there's an idea of, and I'm going to go back just a minute because another Alan Watts story about a mosquito biting an iron bull. And the nature of the mosquito is to bite, and the iron bull is not capable of being bitten. So if we have a desire for something, we separate ourselves from it. And the lesson of that idea, which I got through some very emotionally intense circumstances, was to realize that that which you desire and yourself are not different, that the illusion is actually of the separation. So that there is no separation. There is no separated Anthony. Okay, and it brings up the next point. This is a famous paper by Benoit Mandelbrot called How Long is the Coastline of Britain? And it goes after the naive realism about, you may have heard, if you can't measure something, it doesn't exist. So, and one of the primary tenets of Aristotle's mode of thought is A is A and B is B, and they'll never be the same. Well, this is the coastline paradox. So let's see what would happen. How long is the coastline when we use 100-kilometer rulers? Well, you get so many. What about 50? Well, you get more. Why do you get more? Goes into the indentations. Well, what about a 10-kilometer ruler, or a 1-meter ruler, or a picometer ruler? And the coastline paradox goes like this. The shorter the unit of measurement, the longer gets that which is measured, until when the unit of measurement reaches 0, that which is measured becomes infinite. And I would offer to you my analogy: when we stop making arbitrary distinctions between ourselves, when we stop measuring something, then we become one being. This is anavastha. And you may have heard the story about, I think it was a geologist who was talking about the construction of the world. And after the lecture, a little old lady came up to him and said, "Young man, your lecture is great, but you're making a big error." And he said, "Oh, yes, madam, tell me more." "Well, the planet is resting on the back of a big turtle." And he said, "Okay, that's great. But what's that turtle on?" "Well, they're on another turtle." "And what's that turtle on?" "Oh," she says, "it's turtles all the way down." And anavastha is a Hindu word which means non-finality. And it is talked about that, and in a way, in complexity science, it is turtles all the way down, because I'm going to show you a Mandelbrot zoom. But the way that the Hindu path deals with anavastha is to say it all goes to Brahma, which is to also say that we are Brahma's dream. So we are all one being. So this is the equation for turtles all the way down. And this is the Mandelbrot set. And I'll let this play a little ways. And as far as you want to go, it continues to have self-similarity nested patterns. So I'm going to switch out of this. So I thought, okay, what would the temperament of our being be? And the temperament of wisdom. And the first one is a flow state. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow, and also Zhuangzi, who is a Chinese philosopher, spoke about forgetting the self. Now, I ask my students, okay, everybody has something like this, and unfortunately, we don't value it very highly in our culture. And part of the thing is that we have flow states every day. And yet, I would offer to you that when you forget yourself, you become one with everything. You know, the Buddhist hot dog vendor, make me one with everything. So forgetting the self is a flow state. And notice, if you would please, that each of us has flow states every day. And what would it be like to have that flow state be continuous? And I think that's what was happening with Katagiri. His flow state was continuous. Alan Watts said, D.T. Suzuki once said, "Oh, enlightenment is just like everyday life, except about 2 inches off the ground." So here's the temperament of wisdom. And this is from, goodness, I can't remember the name of the film, but I'm not going to play it very long. But this is like a daily flow. And then the next one is ethics. And I'm going to play you a piece that Maggie Haberman is a New York Times reporter. And I've been very interested in trying to understand what's really going on with the followers of the former president. And she's here talking about She's been studying the former president for probably about 30 years or 35 years. And she's talking about now ethics to me is the golden rule. What you would do, don't do to me what you don't want somebody else to do to you, or do to me what you want me to do with you. So it was very interesting for me to hear this interview.
Started in the 1990s. It started before that, but it really accelerated in the 1990s. And then there were a series of national traumas the voters reacted to. There was an impeachment of Bill Clinton. There was terrorist attacks in the U.S. There were wars that followed. There was an election in 2000 settled by the Supreme Court. There was the fiscal crisis where most people who were seen responsible were not punished. All of that left an impact on voters looking for something that they thought they were finding in him. But his ethos that he came to define in New York in that period you're talking about in the 1980s really was hate as a civic good. Hate should be a civic good.
That was astonishing to me. If we are one being and there's hate being offered, would you like a little hate? Are you sure? What is that hate directed toward? If we are one being, it's hate toward oneself. So I'm going to move through these pretty fast. Then there's empathy, which is feeling with another, compassion and tranquility. And if you guys, this is His Holiness, and one of the things I was going to have an activity. So would you like to engage in an activity? So if you can imagine, where is that part of you that calls it yourself? Is it here or, yeah, okay, here or here? Or, so it's a big balloon around you, okay. So would it be all right if you could certainly keep track of it, but allow it to go down into the ground so that you could retrieve it and just notice how quiet it feels below the basement of this building and down into the ground. And it's completely quiet. And there's no upheaval and no incoming anything to disturb you. So if you're able to feel that quietness, then bring it back up into the body and let it settle at the level of the heart. Because I want you to hear what His Holiness has to say.
So I may talk every day. Whether in America, whether in India, whether in Africa, in Europe, everywhere, Japan, everywhere. I always talk. The best way, effective way to bring inner state. With that inner calmness.
Which you just touched base with.
With that, we can handle all problems more realistically, more effectively. So I believe warm-heartedness, compassionate heart is a key factor for meaningful life.
So I'm going to skip ahead of that. And then next is what I would call a flexibility of awareness, which was the title of this talk. And so you have already heard one of the ways out to bring that tranquility into the body. But I would offer to you that anytime there gets to be some conundrum or something that you don't feel like you can find your way out of, John Wellwood, the transpersonal psychologist, says, put it into a ball and hold it gently, like you would hold a baby. Or the other words were like the sky holds a cloud. So then your attention, your awareness is not inside the difficulty. You're holding it. You're not trying to change it. Okay, that's another way out. But what I'm talking about with the flexibility of awareness, and when I played this for my students, they said, some of them said, oh, we felt so small. My intention is to say, and you've probably seen this video, but I want you to imagine yourself expanding in this way. So if you can expand your awareness beyond the body into the room, just get a sense of what's happening in the room. Okay. And get a sense of what's maybe happening a little bit outside the room. But we'll start with, and this is called Louise, or the cosmic eye. So we zoom out. And this is still you. So this is Google campus, South Bay. Northern California. And it's an expanding context. So now we're beyond the planet. And beyond the solar system. Wish we didn't have so many lights on, but and this continues to the cosmos, and I'm going to stop it. When I first did an exercise with John Wellwood about presence, he had us become present in our body, starting at the toes and then filling up to the ankles and then the knees and then the abdomen and the shoulders, so that our whole body was filled with our conscious presence. And the next thing that he had us do was to say, okay, I'd like you to expand that outside the body just a little bit. So it's out, so your awareness is beyond this standing wave skin bag. Because we're more than this. That's what I asked you, who are you? Okay. And I decided, well, wait, why should I stop with the room? So I filled the building, and then I filled the neighborhood, then I filled the state. And then I kept going to the cosmos. That awareness wasn't any longer Anthony, because there is no Anthony. But it was an extraordinary experience that I've never forgotten. And I would offer to you that the way out is to broaden, always to broaden a context. Okay. The next thing is this idea of humor. My daughter is Down syndrome, and one of the kindest things and profoundest things she ever said to me when she made an error was, silly me. So if you can offer yourself that when you make an error, oh, silly you, because it's very kind. The next thing is trust, and this is Brene Brown, and I'm going to skip because I'm running short on time. And she has an acronym, BRAVING. And the next thing is about relationship. So interpersonal relationship, and you have to have trust to have an interpersonal relationship. And this is from the work of Daniel Shore about interpersonal neurobiology, because when we are relating with another person, you all probably heard of mirror neurons, but our neurology extends beyond, I think our brain. And that's one of Rupert Sheldrake's ideas. Rupert Sheldrake wrote a book that was called Dogs That Know When Their People Are Coming Home. And he did a number of controlled studies with cameras on both the dog's owner and the dog at their home. And it wouldn't matter if the owner was across the city or around the planet. The moment the owner decided to come back home, the dog would get up and go sit by the door. How did they know to do that? What is this field of awareness? And so it's relationship and family and community. And in developing, and you know these people when they come in a room, you can just feel it. I had the great fortune to see the Dalai Lama in person at the Shoreline Amphitheater in the South Bay in 2000. And when he showed up, you could feel his presence. And it's because that he's radiant and there's resonance, so that we get to resonate as human beings. And this reference of the flow state, empathy, flow, ethics, empathy, compassion, tranquility, flexibility of awareness, which is what the seminar is talking about, the ability to, when you get into a box, to say, okay, what's outside? How can I expand the awareness so I can get a good understanding of a context? And so this is His Holiness, but there's one other guy who does this that you can feel, and that's Pope Francis. So then I thought about, well, it does take courage to do this. And I looked up the Chinese characters for courage. And the Chinese characters for courage are Yong Qi. And this is Qi like in Qigong. But Yong is literally, and courage is to burst forth like a bud. And I will leave you with this final quote from Anais Nin, who said, and the time came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. Please blossom. Please blossom. So that's my talk, and we have 5 minutes. Does anybody have questions or comments? So you all understand what the way out is. It's to broaden the context. Yes.
Yeah, you do for the film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It'll go on the recording. So
So I just wanted to bring up, like, I think sometimes there's a bit of resistance to this. Like a lot of abstract ideas got brought up, and so I think sometimes there's like resistance to it just because of, I don't know, the West. And I'm wondering if it's your experience that it's different in other places, or if there's like some like ways to kind of break through those barriers of entry and make like meditation and stuff like that more normal.
yeah, you're waving at me. Oh, to go back. I'm out of the camera. I can't remember who it was, and this is maybe another Alan Watts story. When Jesus went to India, and he said, I and the Father are one. And the people around him in the town said, well, we're so glad you noticed. So I guess I would say, you know, there is a point where everyone needs to come to that threshold. The 12th century Zen, Japanese Zen master Dogen Zenji talked about something called a Genjo Koan, and he said to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to become one with the 10,000 things. That means everything. And when you become one with the 10,000 things, those things drop away, and that dropping away continues endlessly. So I would offer to you that the resistance is only thinking. It's because you're thinking about it. Don't you have times when you're doing something that you love, that you look up and you went, oh shit, there's, 2 hours that have gone by, right? Is there something you have like that? Okay. So where were you then when you had forgotten yourself? And isn't that a meditation? So I think our error is Again, let me offer you the earworm. If you can think of it, it's already too small. I mean, I can offer you some thoughts. Are you sure you wouldn't want some thoughts? But I think it's what I hope to do with this work is offer to everybody that what is termed enlightenment is an everyday experience. We just don't value it that way in this culture. We're hung up on the naive realism that says, you're different than me. Or if it wasn't for those people, well, wait a minute, if those people are me, and you may have heard the Jungian phrase, there's something about those people I just can't stand about myself. Does that answer your question? And I appreciate the resistance because that lets me know you're thinking about it. But again, remember, if you can think about it, you've made it too small. So hang out and notice the next time you find yourself in a flow state. And would it be okay if that flow state could be extended? So there weren't these islands of flow. Would it be right if there was flow all the time? And how do you do that? Well, to understand there is no separated Anthony, there is no separated you. We're one being. I proved that with the coastline paradox. It's an arbitrary thing we think about. And thinking is self-validating. But Jill Bolte Taylor's point is we're feeling creatures who think. And when she had this stroke in her left brain, she became global. And that's immediately available numerous times a day. So can I ask you, would it be right to be in a flow state all the time? But you've experienced it. Okay, so would it be all right if you were more aware of your flow states? Okay, just checking. So anybody else before we're done? So again, please remember, if you think about it, it's already too small. And I really appreciate your awareness. If you want to take down my email, it's wrighthant@sonoma.edu, and I would be delighted to talk with any of you and be as supportive as I possibly can to any of you in any position in your undergraduate degree. I've been down here before and I know the way out. This is a weird ass culture. And there's a lot of people who struggle sometimes with how do you make your way through it. And as I say, I've been down here before and I know the way out. So thank you so much, you guys, for coming.
All right, let's thank Anthony. And of course, if any of you would like to go and speak some more with Anthony during lunch, I have room for 2 or 3 people. That's all covered by our generous endowment. So let's give Anthony one more hand and then I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much, you guys. All right. So we got to get packed up here, and I will. Okay.
Yeah, no,
Hey, man.
My name's Dylan.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
I like what you had to say.
Oh, thank you.
I'm getting out of here soon, hoping to graduate in December.
Okay.
Any advice for the future?
What's your major?
Philosophy. concentration in science and tech.
Okay.
And I'm just kind of, I think. asking
Complexity
about-
science to me is where it's at, because that's the patterns in the natural world.
And so my question to you would be like, what kind of jobs immediately after college, you like, kind of like, might not be on my radar?
The thing about having a philosophy degree is